Hello, everybody. Dr. Jerry Burkett here with another edition of the School Rules Podcast. Again, broadcasting live from the home studio as it is summertime. And actually, my office studio at the university is under construction. I'm moving offices. So I spent a lot of time with my son last week moving the office. And now this week, I've actually got to get in and hook everything back up. So I wouldn't be able to broadcast from my office in Denton anyway, but here we are, and it's still summertime, and we're going to have an episode this week, and then we'll have an episode next week, and then we're going to be off for the summer, so we'll go on summer hiatus because I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm also going to be moving my son into his dorm as he goes off to Florida Atlantic University, which is going to be awesome for him. So what we'll be doing, and as I'm sort of evolving the podcast, we're going to be having more guests coming on. I've got a couple of folks scheduled on later this summer. We'll have those guest on in the fall when we move into the new season of the School Rules Podcast. And then I want to develop this podcast as more of a companion podcast to all of my courses, because things at times get a little repetitive, but my thinking on all of this, and I just kind of get into this rant for a minute, is when this podcast started back in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and it just was a way again to reconnect with students and reconnect with the world. And I've told this story before, I won't get into it too much here, but I always wanted to be on the radio. When I was a kid, I used to talk up records, and I used to play records and pretend I was a DJ and then hit the post. I'd do the weather and all this kind of silliness that, I would do when I was a kid. And I just wanted to be on the radio. And I thought I had a pretty good radio voice growing up, and I was always into music, and I still am. And so I wanted to be on the radio, but this podcast gives me a chance to do that. And so I'm just sort of evolving this along with TikTok and maybe Instagram to try to be one of those almost 50-year-olds who's really doing his best when it comes to social media, because, I don't know that I'm that great at it, which is fine. Frankly, I don't care. So it's going to be, whoever listens to it, that's great. Whoever doesn't, that's fine too. So, but anyway, the point being is that, this podcast was an idea for just to reconnect with students. And the more I've thought about it and how it's evolving, what's going on in the world and what's going on in education. And, back in 2010, when we had a lot of school finance issues in the state of Texas, back then, my wife and I, we wrote a blog back when blogging was a big deal, because we felt that was a good medium to help kind of explain what was happening in governance and education and the changes that were occurring and coming out of a recession. And there was a lot of confusion. And I was a school principal at the time and a newly minted doctor. And I was getting a lot of questions about these things. And I just thought, using a blog would be a really good way to explain. And the blog was successful, and it had a lot of success and a lot of attention. And we got a chance to be in a movie. We were in a documentary called The Texas Promise. And I think that's still out there. PBS put it out. But the point I'm trying to make is that I wanted this podcast to be a conversational tool about education. I wanted it to be a tool that people can use and refer back to. And yeah, I'll draw upon experiences that we're talking about in class, but when you go online and all your courses are online and you lose that face-to-face contact with other students, and what makes education great, what makes graduate school great, are these enriching conversations and discussions. And I want to try to bring more of that back, because frankly, if I was standing face to face in front of students again, I would be doing exactly this. There would be things in the world happening. There would be things in education that are happening. And I would want to bring that into the classroom, and I would want to talk about it. And I'd want to draw on discussion, because that's really what higher education is supposed to be about. It is supposed to be the free exchange of thoughts, the free exchange of ideas. The common opinions, might be present, but then they might not be. And then it gives you a chance to hear those dissenting thoughts so that you can think critically about what's being said and how it applies in your world and your work and your studies. That's what graduate school is supposed to be. And then you don't walk away with a stick up your butt about what somebody said. You come away with a different perspective that you don't have to agree with, but at least you hear another perspective that isn't solely your own. And social media has unfortunately isolated us. and we're more in a bubble now than we've ever been before. So I want to use this as a medium to get my thoughts and opinions and ideas out there. And then I leave comments open. I leave it open on my socials and on YouTube. And then people have things they want to say. Great. I'm cool with that, because it would be no different than it would be in a classroom environment, and it is what it is. But I never also want my students that are currently in my courses to feel like they have to listen to this podcast. Everything that we do is online, and everybody can complete the assignments and do what they're supposed to do without, having listened to any of this. It's just a companion. So School Rules Podcast will now evolve into more of a companion podcast that supports the work that I'm doing in courses, but also gives us a chance to have some of that dialogue that I think is very important. Being said, one of the big things that's on my mind right now is let's talk about when great leaders need to step up. And without hashing anything that's happening in the world, you can go to any news source that you subscribe to and just sort of get a rundown of what's happening in the world. I'm not going to share my opinion on any of those things. But on the surface, you kind of look at it and you go, yeah, we got some issues. There's a problem here. So at what point do great leaders step up? And when leadership is required, when action is required, when responsibility, influence, when these times of crisis and change demand exceptional leadership, when do we recognize when that leadership is truly needed? Because I'm sure there are people who are listening to this going, hey, things are great. I'm happy with the way things are. This is exactly what I wanted. It's what I voted for. It's what I support. And then there's another group out there that's going, God, I don't think I like this at all. This is not what I wanted. This is not what I supported. It's not what I voted for. I hear all of those conversations everywhere, and it just kind of makes you wonder, where do we stand when great leadership is stepping up or not stepping up? So let's talk about some of those things, those critical moments when great leaders should step up and really what that should look like. Now, I think the first one is obvious, is that those critical moments, when we have natural disasters or there's a crisis or an emergency. And there's numerous examples where you have seen leaders who have needed to step in and did step in at an appropriate time when you've got unexpected challenges. I would like to explore more about school principals, who had to step up in times of crisis when they experienced school shootings, because that's an area of interest that I have. And unfortunately, I can name far too many school shootings that have happened even in the last 10 years. And I think about those principals and I wonder, stepping up in those times of crisis to support teachers, students, parents, the community, et cetera, because that's one of those times where that emergency requires a strong leader to come in. Strong leadership is also necessary during times of social change. I think we're seeing that now, where groups of people are airing their opinions on particular topics, and it might be controversial, or it might be done in a way that is requiring, as we're seeing in Los Angeles, a police presence. So strong leadership sometimes is necessary to come to the table and talk about, how do we calm the storm? How do we make these voices heard? And, there are a lot of leaders that should be coming to the table to make these critical things come to light so that we have all voices heard and that we don't have this upheaval, and which then would lead to injuries and deaths and damage of property, which nobody wants. So I think we're seeing times where strong leadership should step up. And frankly, what I see is just both sides bickering at times, and pointing fingers and saying this, that, and the other to one another without really getting anything done. And I don't know that that's helpful to society as a whole. Strong leadership is also necessary when there is transition, when organizations transition, when there's new leadership in place, when new people come in, but also as we're seeing here again in the world, you have these mass layoffs, mass firings, new people coming in. And again, I think it takes strong leadership and bold vision and bold mission. We talk about vision and mission all the time, to come in and say, you know what? We've got to change this philosophy, and here's why. Let's talk about what's best for people. Let's talk about what the research says, and using good quality research to make those decisions, what the data says that we should do. Those are the times where strong leaders should step up and make those critical choices and decisions, but don't do so arbitrarily. Again, bringing voices to the table, using the data, using the information that's in front of you instead of ideology, which I think is another thing people are really frustrated with right now. Now, what do these leaders look like? And I think, again, we talked about this in all the classes, particularly when I focused on transformational leadership, because what we want characteristics of leaders who step up in these moments. And what do they look like? Well, what does it sound like? And what are their actions really doing? And one critical area is they are decisive and they have clarity. They act with confidence and with purpose. They know what they need to do and how they need to do it. And most importantly, they know how to communicate what it is that needs to be said so that the world or people around them can respond. They often have empathy. They definitely have some emotional intelligence. They connect with the people that they serve. They make people feel seen and feel heard. And that level of empathy and that level of emotional intelligence, frankly, we need that right now. We need leaders who have that level of empathy and understanding so that everybody feels like their voice is being heard. And maybe you don't get the result you're looking for right now, but maybe a solution can come down further down the line. So that level of empathy and emotional intelligence, I think, is super important. Some of these great leaders also need to show resilience and show adaptability. You know, the world is rapidly changing, and it's changing so fast that governments can't keep up. Schools can't keep up. The legal system can't keep up sometimes with how fast things are changing. So being able to navigate these challenges without breaking under the pressure of what these changes are doing to the fabric of society or government or whatever. You know, we talk a lot about artificial intelligence and AI, and it's moving so quickly that the next thing you know, the world's going to change around us, and we're not going to have a legal construct or an educational construct or a governmental construct to really handle what's happening. So great leadership needs to push forward and say, you know what? Let's put a pause on this. Let's look at data. Let's get some researchers in on this so that we can make sound choices about what's happening and we can adapt appropriately. The last thing I think is just the most important part of this, and it sometimes it's lost, and that is strategic planning. And that's the ability to sit down and think about the long term and what we're facing, and not just knee-jerk reacting to what's happening in real time, but actually having a strategic plan in place so that when you are confronted with challenges, you make appropriate decisions, you mobilize the right people, you use the appropriate resources to address the challenges that are in front of you. Because having a strategic plan actually can dictate what kind of policies and procedures and communication that you can use in order to address those challenges. Right now, sometimes, at least just for me, it feels like we're just knee-jerking into everything that we do globally. And I just don't know that that's the right way to go about approaching real sound, strong leadership. So all that being said, reactions are fine when a crisis is immediate. But when you see that things aren't immediately a crisis, strategic planning, having the right people in place is probably the best way to go about achieving the goals that need to be achieved. Now listen, this is not a political podcast, nor do I want it to be. I want this to be a talk and a conversational piece about leadership. And so I just want to encourage you to look around you and look for those examples of leadership, and reflect on what's happening and see what kinds of people are being called to step up and how are they responding to it. Leadership isn't about grandstanding and gestures. Sometimes it's about making those tough choices in those small moments. And then little moments can sort of lead to making big organizational change. I know the world is tough right now and we need strong leaders. And frankly, we have leadership programs for a reason because it's a skill that can be taught. But I would encourage you to think about the world around you. Think about the leaders that you have in your life and how they respond to things and how we can influence others to make the right choices when those crises and those challenges happen. That's what I think is most necessary for all of us right now. So as many of you know, of course, I was a former principal, and I was only a school principal for about 2.5 years. I didn't finish out my third year. I was promoted to a director position in the district that I worked in, and I was an assistant principal for 3 years. So I worked as a school leader at the school level for about 5.5 years, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I did a lot of things well. And I wish I could go back and ask my teachers, how I did, at least in their thoughts. I may not want to hear their answers, but I feel like we did accomplish some things, and I felt like I thought I did a good job. But nonetheless, while I think I did some things great, that could have done some things better, had to navigate a lot of challenges, there were some things that I felt, if I pass along some words of wisdom to future principals, and since that's what I teach. So there's 9 things that I came up with, and I was reminded of this last week when I did a training for one of my classes that we work on, and it's a leadership training. And as we're having these discussions, and we're thinking about, what are some things about leadership that you would want to tell other people? I mean, we go through the master's curriculum, of course, and the professional educational leadership standards and all those things, and what the state of Texas requires. But, sometimes just common sense thinking is what needs to be passed on so that you can just have some food for thought. So I have those things here. I have 9 things that are just sort of my reflections from when I was a principal that hopefully I'm going to pass along that maybe you can grow from. So let's get into that. Not everything's going to go your way, number one. And when things don't go your way, no matter how well you plan, or no matter what decisions you make, or what doesn't pan out, and hard conversations, they don't go well. Maybe you were planning and the test scores didn't come back they wanted to come back, or just whatever. If something doesn't go your way, and it's pretty significant. I want to put this in the wow, that really hurts sort of category, because you're going to have good days and bad days. But I'm talking about like you planned for something, and you got the results back, and it just wasn't what you thought it would be. So what I say, and I got this from a mentor of mine, is you get 24 hours of sadness and mourning when things don't go your way. You can 24 hours to sit back and just be sad and reflect on it, because you put a lot of work and effort into it and things didn't go your way. But at some point, you've got to move on. So you give yourself 24 hours, think, reflect, be sad, don't touch it, just walk away from whatever it was. But then you got to come back. So I give you permission that just when that happens, you get 24 hours of sadness before you can move on. The next thing I would say is you need to probably move school districts and move schools. And that was some of the early advice that I got from someone who had worked for the Dallas Independent School District as a leader for a very long time, and even for the Texas Education Agency. And this individual has a building named after them. So I took their mentoring with a lot of full heart. And one of the advice that he gave me is that if you want to grow in education and you want to move in educational leadership, you need to move schools, and you need to move in school districts, because especially in Texas, where there's like over 1,200 school districts and charter schools and private schools, everybody does things differently. Everybody has different leadership styles. Everybody's doing their budgets differently and has all kinds of perspectives on all of these things we're expected to do. So you can get stuck. You can get stuck in these familiar routines, and you won't adapt, or you're not challenged. So moving school districts, getting used to different students, different teachers, different perspectives is really, really important if you want to grow in education. And number 3, as a corollary to that, something that I use as a principal, something I use as a higher education professor, and just simply in life, don't judge people. People are complex. Every teacher, every student, they all carry different experiences that just shape how they interact with you and interact with others. And judging people, it doesn't solve problems. In fact, sometimes it makes things worse. But having an understanding, having an open mind as you work with people without judgment can really go a long way in your leadership. Number 4, and I say this a lot, it's almost a mantra of mine, and I'll say it many times throughout the course of the podcast, is you need to have a curious mind. You need to be somebody who is open, ask questions. You don't have all the answers. Read journals, Watch documentaries, have a curious mind, be interested in things, go out and broaden your perspective, travel, go to parks, stop and watch things, put your phone down. Just be curious about the world around you so that you're always growing and getting smarter and getting more critical in your thinking. And you can't work in education without being flexible. You have to be willing to be adaptable. That's what separates good leaders from great leaders, is their ability to be resilient and adapt to change. We just talked about this in the previous segment. And so being flexible requires that you have an understanding that today may not go the way I need it to go, and I have to be okay with that. So if you're rigid and you stick to a calendar or an agenda, that's going to get blown up as a principal. I promise you that. And you won't be able to get to some of the things that you have planned for. So you've got to have a flexible mindset each and every day. And these are all related in a sense, but number 6 is you need to be open to other perspectives. You're not going to agree with everyone, and they're not always going to agree with you. And you know what? That's fine. The best leaders challenge their own assumptions so that they can make room for other viewpoints that they had never considered before. And you might be shocked at what you hear, because a lot of people bring different aspects to the table, and that's a good thing. So you need to be open to those perspectives, because your ideas aren't the end all be all. And if you think it is, that organization, that school, whatever you're trying to accomplish, it's not going to grow. Okay, the last 3 are all kind of related, and they kind of fall in that communications realm. So number 7 is ask questions. So again, being curious, having a curious mind also comes with you asking questions. Sometimes the most important leadership is acknowledging what you don't know. And there might be people out there that know a heck of a lot more than you. In fact, I know there are. So if you, again, have that curious mind, then ask people questions. Be vulnerable and say, you know what, I've never considered that before. Or no, I don't know the answer to that. So if you can ask those questions, you'll be surprised at what you learn and the decisions you can make after that. And number 8, frankly, is include others in conversations and start considering their opinions. And I feel like I've already belabored this point, but the decisions that you make should never be made in isolation. So you should surround yourself with a group of people, in a sense, to be collaborative and supportive and empower others to contribute their thoughts and their ideas. You would be surprised how many leaders don't want to hear from others. They just want to be told yes, and they just want to be told no. But when you empower others to speak and speak firmly, and even empower them to disagree with you, it's amazing what you can get accomplished. So be sure that you're including others that you trust in the conversation. And last but not least, as a corollary to that, you just need to shut up and listen. Sometimes the best leaders just need to close their mouth and hear what other people are saying. The best leaders don't dominate conversations with their words. They actually create spaces for other people to speak and genuinely care and absorb what other people are thinking. So take time to just be quiet and listen to others. Now, honestly, leadership is a growth process, and you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And as I said earlier, I hope that I was a great principal for the schools and the students and the teachers that I led. And in fact, I want to give a shout out to a former teacher of mine who just became a principal in Louisville ISD. Kaylee Malone, I'm super proud of you. I hope that as you start your principal journey, you'll consider some of these things as you grow and move into leadership positions. You will be surprised at just the smallest little things that you do and how it will impact the entire organization. Sometimes your smile, the way you talk, the way you dress, the way you communicate, all those little things go a really, really long way. So I hope in your principal journey that you are 100% better than the principal that I was. I'm so proud of you. So I wish you the best of luck as you progress in your career, and you're just going to be an amazing principal for Louisville ISD, and they are so lucky to have you. So with that, think about that. What is great leadership? What does it look like for you? And if you're not getting out of your work as a teacher or a principal what you would hoped you would get, then take this as an opportunity to reflect and see where you could move, where you can contribute, how you can be empowered, because that's what great leaders do. And if you're not getting that fulfillment, I assure you there's someone out there that can support you and be a part of your world. So as always, it's summertime. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Bye.